Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today I am at long last going to be trimming my Pagan Otherworlds Tarot. This has actually been a very highly requested video because I have talked about trimming this deck on and off for well over a year, possibly 2 years now at this point. I have spoken about this deck on many recent videos. I've included it in many collection videos. I have talked about it as being a deck of curiosities. I've talked about it as being a second chance deck. I have talked about it as being a deck that I absolutely love but just cannot work with. So this deck, it's a whole thing, right? It's a whole mood with this deck. It's a whole thing. It has really beautiful cardstock. Please don't get me wrong. I do love this, a good, gorgeous linen cardstock. And I've been trying to figure out why it is that this deck is so hard for me to work with when I do have other decks that have very similar linen cardstock to this deck, and they just stay in my hands better. So I thought, at first maybe this was a case of this deck and I just don't get along, right? But when I do readings with this deck, we get along just fine. And actually we converse quite well together. I love the very pippish nature of this deck. The aesthetic is my everything. It is all the grays and the blacks and the whites. This is like one of my favorite 10 of Swords ever. I love a good pip deck. As the cool kids are saying now, pips with feelings. That is very much how this deck reads for me. It reads very elementally, very numerologically. And so in that respect, it is like ticking all of my boxes. The only thing that doesn't tick my box with this particular deck is the fact that it is an oversized tarot deck, which means that if you combine that with this super slippy cardstock, it's a deck that refuses to stay in my hand. And I have quite the difficult time shuffling it. So let's just go ahead and give it a shuffle first. It is a stretch for my hands to make it all the way around this deck. When I can get it going, it shuffles quite beautifully, it bridges quite beautifully, but it has a tendency to run away on me. And it's one of those decks that I feel like I'm gonna end up losing a card. And so because of that, I don't end up using it as often as I would. Don't get me wrong, this is definitely a deck that I still use quite frequently, but it is a deck that I tend to kind of reach for other things instead if I'm, not really feeling like fighting with my cardstock. And I've done a lot of talk lately about the whole cardstock thing. Like there's videos, and I do have, particular cardstocks that I like or that I prefer over others. And again, this is a beautiful cardstock. I'm not saying that it's not. It's just, I think, more the fact that it is oversized. And when you combine that with a super slippy cardstock, it's a deck that I have a lot of difficulty actually working with. So let me pull out a couple of decks, and we're just going to use a few that I happen to have at hand here. This is a Tarot of the Secret Forest, which I believe is Lo Scarabeo, if I am remembering correctly. And here we have the Forest of Enchantment, which is a Llewellyn deck. Now, both of these decks, you can actually see, are quite a bit smaller than the Pagan Otherworlds. So this is your typical Llewellyn size deck that is quite a bit smaller than the Pagan Otherworlds. Here we have a Lo Scarabeo deck. This isn't the greatest example because it's double-sided, but these are actually, I think, the decks that I prefer the size on, and I prefer the cardstock of. If we're really getting into the nitty-gritty of cardstock, which again, I've done a whole video on. But you can see that just for that size reference here, and maybe if we go this way, it'll be more helpful, that there is quite a bit of a difference between the size of these decks, right? And the larger the deck is, the harder it is for me to get my hands around it and shuffle it. So this will probably be actually a day or two process for me because I'm certainly not going to rush it. This is one of the trims and probably really the only trim that I have hesitated for this long and been completely wishy-washy about, because I almost wonder, should I even trim it? Is it just is it something that I should do? And I have decided that at long last that really this deck isn't going to go anywhere, but I do need it to be smaller in order for me to actually work with it in a way that works for me. Now, this particular version does come with some extra cards. So it has the extra moon phases, and I'm hoping that the printing is in a similar position to these, which it looks like it is, because I'm going to use these as kind of my jumping off point for this whole mod. So before we jump in, I have my usual tools here. I have my Fiskars trimmer. I have my Katomaro Pro corner rounder for when it's done. I do also have, which I can pull this extra washi off, my little corner ruler, which helps me create a straight little guide and a cradle. You'll see that here when we get into the actual trim. Now, I do have a full video on going over all of my deck trimming tools, as well as a proper deck mod tutorial, which that is not what this is going to be. This is a mod with me, and I'm just going to be taking you along as I go through the process of modifying the Pagan Otherworlds. Are you ready to get started? I feel like I need to take this really deep, calming breath before I jump in, because this mod makes me nervous, and I don't know why, other than it could be just because I have been putting it off for so long that it's become like this whole thing now. So anyway, let's go ahead and we're just gonna do it. Because you know me, I am all about usually just jumping in and getting the mod done, and I don't usually go back and forth this much, but this deck, I gotta tell you, makes me a little nervous. Okay, so I'm gonna actually use one of these cards for my kind of just setting up where I want it to start with. And as I was working through the, test trim here on this card, I kind of realized that if I set to where this inner border line is actually just beneath the edge of, just right up to the edge of my guard here, then I am pretty close to where I want to be. And that seemed to work really well, so I'm gonna go ahead and go with that. As per usual, I am using my little corner triangles to help me create a little cradle, which helps ensure that all of the cards are cut to the same size, essentially. It's just my kind of quick and lazy way to do it, because once I get a guide set up, I can kind of just slip them all in and out and just do all the sides of one card together, and it makes for a really quick and easy trim most of the time. There are exceptions to that, of course, but most of the time it does a really great job of helping me create a quick and easy trim, and most of the time it actually takes way longer to edge the deck than it does to trim it. We're going to just kind of go through the process, and I will kind of share with you how I'm going to do this, and we'll check back in at different points along the way. So I'm liking where that's sitting for this particular side. I feel like my card is straight. I feel like it's right where I want it to be, and it's going to give me that micro border on the other side. So again, we're just going to cut and see how that goes. Yeah, I think that's where I want it. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is cut all the right side of the deck. So when it comes to shuffling and my issues with a deck, like of it being too long, right? The sides are not really, the left and right side of the deck is not really the biggest concern for me, but it's the top and bottom that creates that length of being able to get my hand around a card, right? I mean, I guess if I was talking about it and I worked with my cards more this way, that would be a concern, but I'm more looking at the length of the card rather than the width of it. So the top and bottom becomes the most important part of what I need to cut off this deck. But I do want to make sure that everything is, looks even, because if I were to just, cut the top and bottom off, then I would have thicker borders on the sides, and that would just kind of drive me a little bit bananas. So I'm going to go ahead and trim the sides so that the entire card remains even all the way through. And to be perfectly honest, I'm starting with the left and right sides just because I'm chicken, and I'm just kind of want to get the feel of cutting this deck and trimming it down before I get into messing with trying to work around titles or really make sure that I am removing titles. So I'm starting with the easiest place first, and that's really what it comes down to. So I'm going to make sure that these cards are in here nice and straight, and again that I'm holding everything down nice and tight because I want to make sure that I'm getting a really, really nice trim, particularly on this deck because I have, you know, made such a big deal out of trimming it. So I feel like it better be a good trim now. Okay, are you ready? We're gonna cut the first card. Fingers crossed. And we're praying. Was it in the right spot? Pretty close. I'm good with that. I'm good with that. I'm not actually real, I know it may not seem like it, but I'm not actually like super particular about that kind of thing when I'm trimming a deck for size. Now, occasionally if I am trimming a deck and it's strictly for aesthetic purposes, I get a lot more nitpicky about, you know, where the trim lines hit and how things are placed on there. And I do want this deck to remain very beautiful, but really I'm trying to get it usable for me. And since that is the main goal, that's really what I'm going to be focusing on. So there we go. I think that's going to work. I think so. All right. So I'm going to do a few more cards here. And again, this is one that because this cardstock is so slippery, that just totally moved on me, which means I can just now cut into that card where I don't want it to be. Yeah, because this cardstock is so slippery and there's now a notch in this card, I can feel it. I am going to go very slow, and I am going to take my time, which means we're not going to do it all on camera because this is a trim that I really do actually need to focus on. And when I'm trying to talk and work my way through the process, I'm not 100% paying attention to what it is that I'm doing with my trimmer. And so just in that case, as I was trying to talk, the card slid just ever so slightly to the right, and I can feel there's a notch in it now. It's very minuscule, but it is there. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and trim off the right and left sides because I'm just going to be repeating this process. I'm going to cut all the right side off, then I'm going to flip the entire deck around, reset my measurements, and cut the left side off. Again, if you want to see a real proper tutorial on how I do this process, there is a actual deck trimming tutorial on my channel. But because I really do need to focus and pay attention to what I'm doing and make sure that I'm holding these slippery cards down really well, because they are sliding on my trimmer, and every time they slide, that shifts where I'm cutting, and that can totally mess up a trim. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those two sides off, and then we will check back in. So I've got both the sides cut, and I'm feeling pretty good about it now. I'm feeling pretty confident. I've kept it going this way because before I move this, I always like to kind of do the check. And to do the check, I kind of just run my finger along the top and the bottom and see if my finger catches anywhere. If it catches anywhere, then there's a good chance that a card might need to be trimmed again. Like, it's kind of wanting to catch right there, so we're going to double check this one. The process overall so far has taken roughly 20 minutes, and that's actually fairly slow for me for a trim, but these cards were shifting around so much on the board that I had to really be careful and take my time. Usually I can do a full trim on a deck in less than a half an hour most of the time. Now that doesn't include quarter rounding and edging and all that, but just to get the edges, the sides, all four sides cut generally takes me about a half an hour. So at this point, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Is it 100% like machine cut straight? No, because there's no way for me to do that. And with this particular deck, again, these cards were just slip sliding around on my board, so I was having to be very, very careful. So now here's the point where we have to make some decisions, or I have to make some decisions, because the way that this particular deck, the titling is done on this particular deck, which is not my favorite, because some of the cards have them on top and bottom, some of the cards have them just on top, and some of them have them just on bottom. While there is consistency within the formatting of the cards that they chose to do that, that's not actually consistent across all 78 cards. So what I'm gonna do is kind of just take a minute and divide them up by where the text falls on the card. And the reason that I'm going to do this is because I am at the point now where I need to make a decision of what I'm going to cut off in terms of titles and numbers. Oops, that goes over there. Because there are two different options. Let me just finish dividing these up first. Okay, so what we've got is, as I mentioned at the start of the video, we have the numbered minors all have just the number at the top. See how slippy this deck is? The courts and the aces all have just titles down at the bottom, and the majors have both a number at the top and a title at the bottom. I really wish they would have just put titles at the bottoms of every card and not done the top numbering. That would have been my preference, because then I would like to keep the titles. And unless I'm trying to restructure a deck, I do try to retain the titles most of the time. It's not that I necessarily need them in every single deck, particularly if it's a Rider-Waite-Smith inspired deck as this one is. I can usually tell by looking at the imagery. But it just does make it easier when you're doing a reading and, you know, you're trying to move through the reading without kind of stumbling over anything to have titles on it. Now, there are a few exceptions with things like my Llewellyn, which is trimmed completely down to just the artwork. I know that deck so well, though. I never trip over, you know, what card is what, and that is partially just because I've used it so often. But here's the thing. Because of these backs, because they are beautifully non-directional and they fill the whole back of the card and just everything beautifully with these backs, right? These are beautiful backs. I do have the option in the way that I trim this deck at this point that I could just trim off one portion or the other. So for example, for the numbered minors, I could just trim off the bottom and that would still make the card small enough, I think, for me to get my hands around, because I'm going to be taking off all of this down here. That'll leave just a little bit at the top with the number at the top. Now, I could have the numbers all at the top, and I could do with the courts and the aces, I could switch that around and just cut the tops off. Now, if I'm cutting them all at the same measurement, regardless of whether I'm cutting top or bottom, they should come out all the same size as humanly close as possible, right? And then with the majors, I would probably just, again, cut off the top so that I just have the titles down at the bottom. So that would mean that I would have titles on the bottom of all of the cards except for the numbered minors. And, you know, that's about roughly half the deck, right? I mean, I don't kind of want to put these all together quite yet, but that's roughly half the deck will have titles on top and half the deck will have titles on bottom. So I'm just kind of trying to think at this point how that might actually look with the aesthetic of the deck. It's not that dissimilar to what we have now, so I think it would actually work pretty well. And I think that it would allow me to kind of have those numbered, those titles and those numbers, and retain those on the cards. So I do believe, because it does look like I could get pretty dang close. So I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with, cause I'm less concerned about these, just to be perfectly honest. Like these, they're very pippish. I know exactly what number I'm looking at, what suit I'm looking at. There's no question or debate within the numbered minors. So I'm gonna kind of just let these chill out for a minute while I kind of take a look at these where I'm thinking that I want to cut the tops off all of these to start with. Now, the thing is that if this goes horribly wrong and I don't like the mismatch, which it's mismatched now, so I'm not sure it's gonna make a difference, but if I were to do it and I didn't like it, then I could still go ahead and cut off whatever side is remaining on the deck and then just, again, get it back down to what I was looking at here. But we're gonna try this first because I can try this first. And then if it doesn't work for me, I can just go ahead and cut off whatever was left because I'm essentially only cutting one side of the deck currently. So we're going to go ahead and go for it. We're gonna try it, see how it goes, and we're going to hope for the best. Okay, so what was I gonna do? I'm cutting off the tops of these cards and I'm just gonna go through and make sure that every single one of these cards does have a title at the bottom. Because I don't want to accidentally cut the wrong thing. So, because again, remember we're leaving the titles on the majors, the quarts, and the aces. So I think we are all good. Yeah, we are all good with that. Okay, so that's what we're gonna do. And I am gonna pull out so we're double checking. I'm gonna pull out the major, a quart, and an ace. Oh, my ace of pentacles, my favorite one. Okay, so we're gonna try these and we're just gonna make sure, you know, we're gonna double check before I just say that, yes, this is the way we're doing it. Although once I cut it, right, we're done. I've cut it and there's no going back. So let's go ahead and do this. Now, because I have less like push through the card going this way, it's a shorter side, I'm getting less sliding. Look at that. That's cool. I think that's gonna work. So that one's there. Let's go ahead and try a quart just to make sure because occasionally you can get differences. We're gonna cut that. And there we have it. So my majors will all have just the title at the bottom. My aces will just have titles at the bottom, and my quarts will just have titles at the bottom. And they're all the same size. It's always a bonus. Okay, so let me go ahead and cut these all down. And then we'll take a look at the numbered minors. Okay, so I have trimmed off the tops of all of these cards and they all came out pretty straight. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to set these aside, is now I'm going to cut off the bottom. So basically I'm just cutting off all that extra stuff, right, of the numbers. So again, I'm going to go through and make sure that none of these have any text on the bottom, which basically means I'm making sure that they are all not only the correct cards, but going in the right direction, because that is real important when you are doing a modification such as this. Always want to make sure all the cards are always going in the same direction, unless you are intentionally cutting different sides as I'm doing here. So I'm leaving the numbers on the top, which means I'm not moving my measurement guide at all because I want to be cutting the exact same amount of card off so that they come out the same size as these. That's the goal anyway. Okay, so I'm going to put these in here, and basically if I have done everything properly and paid attention like I should have, I should be able to cut off the bottoms of all of these and they should come out the same size as the other cards. Now I am still getting some slipping and I'm having to hold down real tight again. So again, I'm going to try to pay close attention to what I'm doing, but are they the same? Yes, they are. So that's fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and trim these off. and then we'll see what we ended up with. Normally I would hang on to all of these little bits, like at least a handful of them, to test some edging materials, you know, to see different markers, different stamps, how they bleed, how they do on the cards. But because I have all these extra moon phase cards, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to just use those because those have pretty much become my sample cards. So I'm just gonna basically probably not do this tonight, because to be perfectly honest, after holding all of those cards down for so long and pressing so tight in order to get them not to shift around, my hand's quite tired, but we'll just do one. Didn't get it in there correctly. And that's what it's gonna look like. And again, I'm just using this small corner rounder so that I'm not cutting into where the corners are going, you know, really close to the edge there. So let's just do one of each so we can see, and then I will finish up corner rounding them after I give my hand a little break. And then we'll come back and talk colors. So there is a court card, a major, and a numbered minor, which I think looks really, really good. I have, as you saw, I corner rounded it. We saw it trimmed. I finished corner rounding it. That's what I did last night. So we're on to another day. And I love it. I think it looks awesome. I did the, you know, titles on the bottom and then the numbers on the top, and I think it came out really well. It's a much, much nicer size for me. I can get my hands around it. Does it shuffle? I mean, not as well as it did, because they never do when you trim them, right? It's never gonna be like it is when it's machine cut. But I can still definitely riffle shuffle it. I can overhand it this way now, and I just have to tell you, like, that all makes me so happy that I can actually work with this deck now in a way that, you know, works for me and my practice and the way that I do things. Is it going to, it's still super slidey. I was just kind of like, does it look weird having some of them on top and some of them on bottom? I don't think it does. I think it still works. So what I'm gonna do at this point, because I mean, I've trimmed it now and I feel like I should just finish it off with a nice edging job, even though it doesn't look bad unedged at all. But I thought what would be really cool would be to, let me grab my handy dandy little paper towels. And I have a couple of my moon cards for testing, right? And I think what I want to do is, let me grab a scrap piece of paper. I think I want to do this kind of bronzy color. Like, I don't really want gold. I don't want shiny gold, because I don't feel like shiny gold. I mean, I've seen it with shiny gold and I think that looks good. Like, I don't mean that it doesn't, but I feel like I want to kind of pull in a little bit more of that earthy energy. So I've got my bin of Tombos here. And I think I'm gonna try to find my typical, that one looks really dead, the Tombow 026. Ooh, that one looks good. I feel like this one is, oh yeah, that one's done. That's very yellow, but it does come out more bronzy when it's on the card. And again, we have testers, so I'm gonna be able to test it. I feel like those are pretty much the same color. This is more golden. This is too brown, in my opinion. I mean, we always have good old vintage linen. That's a fan favorite. Actually, the antique linen might be the color I'm looking for. It's not too yellow, it's not too brown. I really need to be wiping these off, but we're just testing, we're just playing right now. That is definitely giving it more of a brownish yellow look. And I kind of dig that. The good thing is that if I totally, like, if I do it, let's look, it's a lot of work, but if I do it and I'm like, that, I hate that color now, or it doesn't work or whatever, like, I'm trying to tell off of just 2 cards and it's ridiculous. but I think that is closer to the color that I want. I can go over the whole thing and cover it in the gold, and that's always a great backup. You can also always cover it in black. A gold stamp, or really any of these stamps, like except the distress stamps, they don't tend to fill as well, but any of the brilliance, the metallic lines will fill to the point of covering over just about any other color that you have. If you do 1 to 2 coats of it, it'll cover up everything. So if I do it in the antique linen and then later on I'm like, yeah, I really don't like that color, it's not what I wanted, then I can go ahead and just do it over with the gold. I have seen this deck edged in gold before and it does look beautiful. So I think that's what I'm gonna do. As I've shown in other videos, basically what I'm gonna do, and I guess we're gonna start with the Queen of Wands here, is I just take it with the stamp and I just run the stamp across the card, same as you would a marker. With the distressed inks, because they're not meant to be full coverage, you do kind of need to, you know, rub it in there a little bit. However, again, like I said, it's a pretty forgiving ink, so if you kind of mess it up and get some elsewhere, you know, get some on the front or the back, it's okay. You can generally wipe it off. And I do always take a paper towel and go around my card. It doesn't matter if I'm using ink or marker or what, because I will always get excess. And I want to get as much of the excess off as I can. So that's the plan. We're done it now, so hopefully it's gonna turn out all right. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna edge the deck, and then we'll take a look at what it looks like once I get a layer of the antique linen on it. All right, we're gonna do a quick little check-in because I've got, you know, roughly half the deck edged. I'm gonna try not to touch it too much because it's not like super dry, but I just kind of wanted to show you the halfway point and see what a difference it makes. If I could get it, like, I'm seriously trying not to touch it a ton, and look at me just sticking my fingers all over it. So hopefully you can see there, I mean, big difference, right? Big difference. So I just wanted to kind of do a little, you know, halfway point check-in. Here's what it's looking like, which is much closer to the color that I was hoping to get. It's a little bit kind of more of that kind of a dusty gold type of a thing without being like super blingy. So that is exactly what I was after. So I'm happy that I decided to do it with the antique linen. Again, I need to stop touching these because they're not quite dry yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish edging the rest of the deck, let it dry so we can take a look at the final thing, and we'll do a little final flip through of the deck, totally modified. Okay, I have finished edging the whole deck, and yeah, this was the color I was after. See if I can hold it straight here and put a card up for comparison. Like that is the total kind of bronzy gold that I was after with this edging job. So let's go ahead and take a look at the finished deck. Again, I did trim it down, specifically leaving the titles or the numbers on the numbered minors, and then I left the titles on the majors and the court cards as well as the aces, trimmed it all down. It was a whole process to do that, but I think it was well worth it in the end. And then I edged it in this Tim Holtz distressed ink in antique linen. I do really love the way it turned out. It's a much smaller deck now. It's a much easier size for me to get my hands around. I think it still looks fantastic. I left just a little bit of that beige border around the outside. Again, also because I was doing different trimmings on different cards. So on the numbered minors, again, I just cut off that excess on the bottom, and on the other cards, I cut off from the top. So doing that and then just leaving that little kind of painted edge border that we have on this deck, I think worked really well for that. And yeah, I love the way it came out. It should be fairly dry by now, so let's go ahead and give it a shuffle. It does not, because you know it's not machine cut now, it's cut by hand. It doesn't shuffle quite as good as it did before, but the big thing is I can get my hands around it now, and I can riffle it, and I can bridge it, and it all stays together and in my hands, which is really fantastic. I can also overhand shuffle it again, so that's wonderful. It's really, those two kind of shuffling methods are a big part of my reading practice and how I work with the tarot, so I'm glad to have a deck this size that I can shuffle it. Unfortunately, I didn't keep any of the the moon cards at their original size. They've all been somewhat trimmed down in some configuration or another, so I don't have any original size to show you. But I think at the start of the video, I compared it to a Llewellyn deck. And so now that you can see it's trimmed, it's quite a bit smaller now. It's a little taller than a Llewellyn, but a little bit skinnier. So I'm good with that. It's a good size for me. Let's just lay a few cards out so we can kind of see how they look. Again, it's just really taking off all that excess border, and I didn't really change anything about the the aesthetic of the deck or anything like that. I just took off the excess, and that just makes the deck smaller. Again, still retaining a little bit of the border around the outside of it, and also, edging the deck in this kind of antique-y linen color, which really came out with this kind of beautiful bronze color, which I think looks absolutely gorgeous with this deck. I think it looks beautiful like this. I love that it's a smaller size. I love that I can get my hands around it. And I think it still really retains the energy of the deck, which is always wonderful. I hope you enjoyed this process video as I went through and modified my Pagan Otherworlds Tarot. As always, you'll find links for everything that I've talked about here in the description box below, as well as links to more additional mod videos if you are interested in those. All right, my friends, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.